You felt the shift before you saw it. The meeting ended normally. Your manager nodded, smiled, thanked you for the update, but something in the room had already changed. What you're sensing has a name. It's called the high maintenance label, and managers apply it silently, often once before you ever suspect it. In the next 12 minutes, I'm going to decode exactly when this label gets attached, why it sticks, and how to recognize the moment it happens to you. Here's the first uncomfortable truth. The label rarely forms during conflict. It forms during a small, ordinary moment when you asked one clarifying question too many. But the real damage happens later, when that label quietly travels into rooms you'll never sit in. Most professionals assume high maintenance means complainers, drama, or constant escalation. That's the public definition. The private definition is different. Inside a manager's head, high maintenance means anyone who creates cognitive load they didn't budget for. That cognitive load can come from anything. Asking for clarity, pushing back on vague feedback, wanting written confirmation, requesting a real timeline. None of these are unreasonable, but each one costs your manager mental energy they expected to spend elsewhere. Picture this: Tuesday afternoon. Your manager assigns a project with fuzzy requirements. You ask 3 specific scoping questions to do it well. To you, that's professionalism. To a stretched manager, that's 3 extra decisions they didn't want to make today. Here's the quiet part. The label doesn't form because you were wrong. It forms because you made them think when they wanted to move on. This is where the pattern reveals itself. The label is a shortcut, not a judgment. It's how managers tag employees who require deliberate handling. And once you're tagged, the handling changes. Information starts flowing around you instead of through you. Decisions get pre-baked before they reach your desk. What you thought was random exclusion is actually scheduled efficiency. Your manager is routing around the cognitive cost of dealing with you directly. The exact moment of the label is usually quieter than you'd expect. It often happens in a one-on-one where you raised a legitimate concern. You walked out thinking the conversation went well. Your manager walked out thinking this person is going to require extra steps from now on. That single internal sentence is the marker. From that moment forward, you exist in their mind as a managed entity, not a trusted operator. Here's what makes this worse. The label is invisible to you but visible to everyone above your manager. In calibration meetings, your name comes up with a slight hesitation, a pause, a phrase like, strong work, but needs careful handling. That phrase is the death sentence of your promotion cycle, not because it's harsh, but because it's quietly disqualifying. This is the part nobody warns you about. Managers protect their own bandwidth above almost everything else. A high performer who creates friction is more expensive to them than a mid-performer who creates none. Cognitive cost beats output every time. If this sounds like your last review cycle, you're not paranoid, you're paying attention. Let me give you a clearer example. Imagine a calibration meeting. 12 names on a screen. Your manager has 40 seconds to advocate for each one. For the colleague, they consider low maintenance. The advocacy is effortless. For you, they pause, choose words carefully, and the room registers that hesitation. That hesitation is the entire conversation. The room doesn't remember your achievements. It remembers the friction in your manager's voice. Here's where it gets sharper. There are 5 specific triggers that install the label faster than anything else. The first is asking the same question twice in different forms. To you, it's thoroughness. To them, it's distrust of their first answer. The second is requesting written confirmation of verbal agreements, reasonable, professional, and quietly threatening to managers who prefer plausible deniability. The third is pushing back on vague feedback. When you say, "Can you give me a specific example?" you're forcing them to do work they hope to avoid. The fourth is bringing up old commitments, reminding a manager what they promised 3 months ago activates defensiveness, not accountability. The fifth is the emotional one. Visible frustration, even minor, even justified, gets remembered far longer than visible compliance. Now, none of these behaviors are wrong. Some of them are exactly what high performers should do. But each one carries a cost. The cost isn't the behavior. The cost is the pattern. 1 instance is forgotten. 3 instances become a story your manager tells themselves about you. Watch what happens next. Once the story exists, every future interaction gets filtered through it. Neutral emails sound demanding. Normal questions unlike challenges. This is confirmation bias operating at full speed inside your manager's nervous system. You can't outrun it with better work. You can only manage the perception around it. Quick question for you. Have you ever walked out of a one-on-one feeling like you advocated, well, only to notice cooling in the weeks after? Drop a comment with the word noticed if you've lived that exact pattern. I read them, and it helps me see which dynamics are hitting hardest right now. If this is the first script of mine you're watching, hit subscribe. The channel exists to decode exactly these invisible workplace systems. Now back to the deeper layer, because this is where most professionals lose ground without realizing it. Once you're labeled, your manager starts pre-managing you. They rehearse conversations before having them. They draft careful messages instead of casual ones. That extra effort feels like care to you. It's actually distance. They're handling you, not collaborating with you. The deeper problem is that this distance compounds. Every careful conversation reinforces the belief that you require careful conversations. You become the colleague whose name gets mentioned with a slight sigh. Not because you did anything wrong, but because handling you has become a category of work. And here's the reveal that lands hardest. The colleague who replaced you in your manager's confidence didn't outperform you. They just cost less to manage. They asked fewer clarifying questions. They accepted vague feedback without follow-up. They never requested things in writing. You can be better, smarter, and more accurate, and still lose the political position to someone easier to think about. This is the truth that reorders how careers actually work. Output matters. Manageability matters more. In most rooms, most of the time. Picture this scene. Your manager is preparing the promotion list. 2 candidates, similar performance. One requires explanation. One doesn't. The one who doesn't goes on the list first, not because they're stronger, but because advocating for them costs nothing. That's the entire mechanism. Promotions flow toward the path of least managerial resistance, and the high maintenance label is the resistance. Here's what to watch for. The first sign you've been labeled is a subtle change in how your manager opens conversations with you. They start sentences more carefully. They preface things with, "I want to make sure this lands well." That preface is the tell. The second sign is the late responses on Slack. Not absent, just slower. Your messages start sitting unread longer than your colleagues' messages do. The third sign is the disappearance of casual updates. The informal heads up about a decision now arrives as a formal announcement to the whole team. The fourth sign is the most painful. Your manager stops giving you negative feedback, not because there is none, but because giving it isn't worth the conversation it creates. When negative feedback stops, you've moved from a developmental relationship to a managed one. That transition is the label fully installed. So what do you do once you recognize the pattern? The answer is not to become passive. Passive employees get a different, worse label. The answer is to reduce cognitive cost without reducing standards. Same questions, fewer of them. Same boundaries, lighter framing. Try this exact phrase next time. "I want to make sure I understand. Could you clarify the metric?" That asks for clarity without sounding like a challenge. Try this one for written confirmation. "I'll send a quick recap of what we agreed, just so we're aligned." You get the paper trail without the demand. When you get vague feedback, try, "Thanks for the feedback. I'll think about it." Then follow up in writing 2 days later, calmly, with specifics. When old commitments get ignored, try, "What outcome are we trying to achieve here?" That reframes the conversation forward instead of backward. These phrases don't make you smaller, they make you less expensive to engage with, which preserves your strategic position. This is where the pattern accelerates. Once you reduce cognitive cost, your manager starts including you in informal channels again. The Slack response times shorten. The casual updates return. The careful prefaces drop. You're being recategorized in real time. But here's the harder truth. Some labels never fully come off. If you've been managed at a distance for over a year, the story has hardened. In that case, the strategy isn't repair. It's relocation, either a new manager, a new team, or a new company, before the label calcifies into your reputation. Reputation outlives roles. The story your manager tells about you in calibration rooms will follow you into your next internal move. That's why the high maintenance label is one of the most expensive labels in corporate life. It travels quietly, applies broadly, and rarely gets re-examined. The professionals who survive it are the ones who recognize the moment it gets applied and adjust before the story hardens. So here's the question to sit with tonight. When was the last time your manager paused before responding to you, even slightly? That pause is the data. That pause is the label forming, or already formed. Trust it more than the words that came after. If this decoded something you've been feeling for months, drop the word pause in the comments. I want to see how widespread this moment really is. Subscribe if you want the rest of the hidden systems decoded the same way. Office politics, calibration mechanics, succession planning, all of it. The professionals who get promoted aren't the ones who never get labeled. They're the ones who notice the moment of labeling and move before the label sets. You don't need to be lower maintenance. You need to be unmistakably worth the maintenance in rooms you'll never enter. Cold, clear, true. The label is quiet. Your response doesn't have to be.